The transport ship New Dawn moved slowly through the cold darkness of space. Inside its metal walls, 50,000 people lived their daily lives. They ate breakfast together. They laughed at old jokes. Children ran through the hallways while their parents called after them to slow down. Old couples held hands and watched the stars pass by through the big windows. These were ordinary people with ordinary dreams. They had left Earth behind to start new lives on a distant world called Nosh. For Captain Daniel Harris stood on the bridge of the New Dawn. He was a tall man with gray hair and kind eyes. He had been flying ships for 30 years, and he loved his job. Every morning he woke up grateful to be among the stars. He looked at the sensor screens and saw nothing but empty space ahead. Everything was quiet. Everything was peaceful. "How are the passengers doing today?" he asked his second-in-command. Lieutenant Amy Carter smiled at him. She was young, barely 30, but she was smart and brave. "Everyone is fine, Captain. The children in Section 7 are having a birthday party for one of the little girls. She turned 6 today." Harris nodded and smiled. He liked hearing about the small moments of happiness on his ship. These 50,000 souls were his responsibility, and he took that responsibility seriously. He had promised to deliver them safely to their new home. He intended to keep that promise. The New Dawn was traveling through Dominari space. The Dominar were an ancient alien species who had ruled this part of the galaxy for 6,000 years. They were tall creatures covered in dark scales, with cold yellow eyes and long claws. They believed themselves to be the greatest species in the universe. They looked down on younger races like humans, calling them children who did not understand how the galaxy worked. Humanity had signed a treaty with the Dominar 10 years ago. The treaty allowed human ships to pass through Dominari territory if they had the proper permits. The New Dawn had all the correct paperwork. Everything was legal. Everything was proper. None of that would matter. Captain Carter said suddenly, her voice changing. "I am detecting ships on approach. 12 vessels. They are Dominari warships." Harris frowned. This was strange. There was no reason for warships to approach a civilian transport. Open a channel to them. Tell them who we are and show them our transit permit. Carter sent the message. They waited. The Dominari ships came closer and closer. No response came back. "Captain, they are charging weapons," Carter reported. Her voice was shaking now. Harris felt his heart turn cold. This has to be a mistake. Send the message again. Tell them we are civilians. We have 50,000 innocent people on board. We are not a threat. Carter sent the message again. The response was not words. The response was weapons fire. The first blast hit the engines of the New Dawn. The ship shook violently. Alarms screamed throughout every corridor. People fell to the floor. Children cried. Parents grabbed their families and held them tight. "Engines are gone," Carter reported, her fingers flying across her controls. "We cannot move. We cannot run." Harris activated the emergency beacon. It would send a distress signal back to Earth. Someone would know what happened here. Someone would tell the story. He grabbed the communication system and spoke to his passengers. "All hands, this is the captain. We are under attack by Dominari forces. I need everyone to remain calm. Find shelter. Stay together. Help each other." He paused, not knowing what else to say. "I am sorry." The Dominari ships surrounded the helpless New Dawn. Boarding craft launched from their warships and attached themselves to the human vessel. Airlocks were forced open. Soldiers in black armor poured inside. The commander of this attack was named Keth Vorath. He was a Dominar warlord who had lived for over 300 years. He hated humans. He hated how quickly they had spread across the galaxy. He hated how other species were starting to respect them. He believed it was time to remind the universe that the Dominari were supreme. Vorath walked through the corridors of the New Dawn. His soldiers had already begun their terrible work. He stepped over bodies without looking down. He felt nothing. To him, these humans were insects. Killing them was no different than stepping on ants. In Section 7, the birthday party had turned into a nightmare. Soldiers broke down the doors and dragged people out. A little girl in a paper crown cried for her mother. She never found her. Throughout the ship, the same horror repeated itself. Families were separated. People who tried to fight back were killed immediately. People who surrendered were killed anyway. There was no mercy. There was no hesitation. The Dominari soldiers had been told to leave no survivors. Captain Harris was dragged to the bridge where Vorath waited. The alien commander looked at the human with disgust. "You come through our space," Vorath said, acting like you belong here. "Your species is young and foolish. You have forgotten your place in the universe." Vorath stood as tall as he could. Blood ran down his face from a cut on his forehead. "These are innocent people, families, children. You have no right to do this." Vorath laughed. It was a cold, cruel sound. "Right, we are the Dominari. We have ruled these stars for 6,000 years. We decide what is right." He raised his weapon and pointed it at the captain. Harris thought of his wife back on Earth. He thought of his daughter, his grandchildren. He would never see them again. But he could give them one last gift. He could give them the truth. He activated the ship's recording system. Everything that happened next would be transmitted on the emergency beacon. Earth would see it all. "Tell Earth we love them," Harris said. "Tell them to remember us." Vorath pulled the trigger. The massacre lasted 3 hours. When it was finished, 50,000 humans were dead. The Dominari soldiers piled the bodies in the cargo bays. They took pictures and videos. They wanted the galaxy to see what they had done. Vorath recorded a message that he broadcast on open channels. He wanted every species in the galaxy to hear his words. "Let this be a lesson to all lesser species," he declared. "The Dominari are eternal. You are nothing. Any who forget this truth will share the fate of these humans." He ordered his ships to leave. The new dawn was left drifting in the darkness. A tomb filled with 50,000 souls who would never see their new home. Back on Earth, in the underground command center of the United Earth Defense Force, Admiral Karen Mitchell received the emergency transmission. She was a woman of 55 years, with short gray hair and sharp eyes that had seen many battles. But she had never seen anything like this. She watched the recording in silence. She watched Daniel Harris die. She watched families torn apart. She watched children fall. She watched until there was nothing left to watch. When the recording ended, the room was completely silent. Officers stood frozen at their stations. Some had tears running down their faces. Others stared at their screens with empty eyes. Mitchell turned to her aide, Commander Scott Palmer. He was a young man who had always admired her calm under pressure, but the look in her eyes now made him step backward. "Contact the president," she said. Her voice was steady, but there was something beneath it, something cold and hard. "Contact every military commander on Earth. Contact every government leader." "What should I tell them, Admiral?" Mitchell looked at the frozen image on her screen. It showed Keth Vorath standing over the body of Captain Harris. Smiling for the camera, "Tell them," she said slowly, "that humanity needs to have a conversation about war." The news spread across Earth like fire through dry grass. Every screen on the planet showed the same images. Every speaker played the same sounds. People stopped in the streets to watch. They stopped in their homes, their offices, their schools. They watched 50,000 of their brothers and sisters die, and they could not look away. There was no panic. There was no chaos. There was something worse. There was silence. In New York, people gathered in Times Square. The giant screens played the recording on a loop. No one spoke. No one moved. They just stood there, shoulder to shoulder, watching and remembering. Some held candles. Some held pictures of people they had known on the new dawn. A mother stood in the front row, holding a photograph of her daughter. Her daughter had been 23 years old. She had been going to Ethon 4 to become a teacher. Now she would never teach anyone anything. The same scene repeated in cities around. The world, London, Tokyo, Mumbai, Cairo, Sydney, Buenos Aires, millions of people gathered in public spaces. Not to protest or to riot, but simply to stand together. They needed to feel that they were not alone. President Richard Kane addressed the nation that night. He was a man of 60 years, tall and broad, with a face that showed every difficult decision he had ever made. He had been a soldier once, long ago. He understood what war meant. He understood what was coming. "My fellow humans," he began, "today we learned the true cost of living among the stars. 50,000 innocent people, our people, were murdered by the Dominari hegemony. They were killed not because they had done anything wrong, but simply because they existed. Simply because they were human." He paused and looked directly into the camera. "The Dominari believe that they are superior to us. They believe that because they are old, they are powerful. They believe that we will cry and complain and then eventually accept our loss because we have no other choice." His voice hardened. "They are wrong." 3 days later, the Galactic Assembly held an emergency meeting. The assembly was a gathering of over 300 different alien species, who met to discuss matters that affected the whole galaxy. They met on a neutral space station called Concordia, a massive structure that floated in empty space, far from any single species. Territory Ambassador Linda Hayes represented humanity at the assembly. She was a small woman, with dark hair and calm eyes. She had spent 20 years as a diplomat, solving problems with words instead of weapons. But some problems could not be solved with words. The Dominar ambassador was named Veth Soren. He was a tall, elegant creature who wore expensive robes and spoke with a voice like honey poured over broken glass. He smiled as he addressed the assembly. "This unfortunate incident has been greatly exaggerated," he said smoothly. "The human vessel was in restricted space without proper authorization. Our forces acted according to hegemony law. We regret any loss of life, but we cannot be held responsible for the humans' own carelessness." Hayes stood up to respond. The assembly hall fell silent. Everyone wanted to hear what the humans would say. "I have a recording," Hayes said quietly. "I would like to play it for the assembly." Before Soren could object, the recording began. The assembly watched in horror as the truth unfolded before them. They saw the New Dawn's transit permits fully legal and properly filed. They saw the Dominari ships attack without warning. They saw unarmed civilians executed one by one. They heard Keth Vorath laughing as he killed children. When the recording ended, several ambassadors had left the chamber. They could not watch anymore. Others sat frozen in their seats, their faces showing shock and disgust. Soren tried to speak, but Hayes cut him off. 50,000 dead," she said, her voice still quiet but now carrying an edge like a knife. "You can lie to this assembly. You can twist words and hide behind your laws. But the truth is on that recording. The truth is written in the blood of our people." She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of every ambassador who would look at her. "Humanity has always believed in peace. We came to the stars hoping to make friends, to learn, to grow alongside other species. We did not want war. We still do not want war." She turned to face Soren directly. "But we will not accept this. We will not forget, and we will not forgive." She walked out of the chamber without another word, back on Earth. Military leaders gathered in secure bunkers to plan their response. Admiral Mitchell stood before a room full of generals, admirals, and defense ministers. A massive holographic display showed the layout of Dominari space. "The hegemony controls over 200 star systems," she explained. "They have a combined fleet of approximately 4,000 warships. Their technology is advanced, possibly superior to ours in some areas. They have been fighting wars for 6,000 years." Secretary of Defense Paul Crawford frowned at the display. "Those are not encouraging numbers, Admiral." "No, sir, they are not," Mitchell agreed. "If we fight a conventional war, we will lose. The Dominari have too many ships, too many resources, too much experience. Then what do you suggest?" Crawford asked. Mitchell changed the display. New images appeared showing hidden jump points, secret routes through space, and weak spots in the Dominari defense network. "We have spent the last 10 years preparing for this possibility," she said. "We knew that Dominari saw us as a threat. We knew that someday they might decide to remove that threat. So we prepared." She highlighted a series of points deep inside Dominari territory. "Their empire is old, which means it is also slow. They rely on the same tactics that worked for them thousands of years ago. They expect enemies to attack their borders and slowly push inward. They do not expect enemies to appear in their heartland without warning. General Marcus Troy, commander of the Marine Corps, leaned forward. You are talking about a surgical strike. Hit them where they least expect it. I am talking about more than that, Mitchell said. I am talking about ending this quickly. We hit their command structure, their shipyards, their military leadership. We capture or kill everyone responsible for the new dawn. We make them pay such a price that they will never consider attacking us again. The room was silent for a moment. Then President Kane spoke. He had been sitting quietly in the corner, listening to everything. This will not be a small operation, he said. This will be war. Real war. People will die. Ships will be destroyed. We may lose. Mitchell nodded. Yes, sir. We may lose. But if we do nothing, we definitely lose. The Dominari will see our silence as weakness. They will attack again and again until humanity is either destroyed or enslaved. The only way to survive is to show them that attacking us has consequences. Kane stood and walked to the display. He studied the maps for a long time. Everyone in the room held their breath.
How long do you need to prepare?
He finally asked. 2 weeks, Mitchell replied. Kane turned to face the assembled leaders. Then you have 2 weeks. Prepare the fleet. Train the soldiers. Get everything ready. He paused. In 2 weeks, we go to war. Across the planet, the word spread. Factories that made consumer goods switched to making weapons and armor. Universities canceled classes so students could volunteer for service. Families said goodbye to sons and daughters, husbands and wives, knowing they might never see them again, but there was no hesitation. There was no debate. 50,000 people had died, and humanity would answer for every single one of them. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when you pushed humans too far. Inner quarters aboard the command ship Resolute. Admiral Mitchell looked at a photograph on her desk. It showed a young woman with bright eyes and a wide smile. Her niece. Her niece had been on the New Dawn, traveling to Ethanford to start a medical practice. Mitchell touched the photograph gently. I am coming, she whispered. I promise. I am coming for all of them. The Dominari had ruled the stars for 6,000 years. In all that time, no enemy had ever threatened their homeworld. No enemy had ever come close. Their borders were protected by massive fleets and powerful weapons. Their territory was vast, and their resources were endless. They believed themselves to be untouchable. They were wrong. Admiral Karen Mitchell stood on the bridge of the Resolute, watching the countdown timer on her display. Around her, 200 human warships waited in the darkness between stars. They had traveled through hidden jump points that the Dominar did not know existed. They had moved in complete silence, hiding their energy signatures, communicating only through tight beam lasers that could not be intercepted. Now they floated just outside Dominari sensor range, waiting for the signal to attack. All ships report ready, Commander Palmer announced. We are in position. Mitchell nodded slowly. She thought about the 50,000 dead. She thought about her niece's smile. She thought about the little girl who had been having a birthday party when the Dominari soldiers came through the door. Begin the attack, she ordered. 200 ships jumped simultaneously. They appeared in the heart of Dominari space, right next to the headquarters of the Dominari First Fleet. For a moment, nothing happened. The Dominari sensors did not even register what they were seeing. Human ships were not supposed to be here. Human ships could not be here. Then the missiles launched. The Dominari point defense systems were designed to handle a few dozen missiles, maybe 100 at most. The humans launched thousands. They filled the space around the Dominari fleet with so much fire that the defensive systems simply could not keep up. Ship after ship exploded. The Dominar First Fleet, which had terrorized this sector of the galaxy for centuries, was being destroyed in minutes. Officers screamed orders that no one could follow. Captains tried to rally their crews. None of it mattered. Commander Julia Reed led the fighter squadrons that tore through the Dominari formations. She was 32 years old, with short red hair and a scar on her chin from a training accident. She had lost her brother on the New Dawn. He had been a chef, going to Ethonfor to open a restaurant. He had made the best pancakes she had ever tasted. "Blue Squadron, follow me," she called over the radio. "We are taking out their command ship." Her fighters dove toward the massive Dominari flagship. Anti-aircraft fire filled the space around them. Pilots died. Ships exploded. Reed kept flying. She had a job to do. Her missiles struck the flagship's engines. Secondary explosions ripped through the vessel. The great ship, which had led the Dominari fleet for 300 years, broke apart and drifted into the darkness. "Target destroyed," Reed reported. Her voice was calm, professional. Inside, she was screaming. The battle lasted for hours. When it was finished, the Dominari First Fleet no longer existed. 312 warships had been reduced to floating wreckage. The humans had lost 37 ships. It was a victory beyond anything the military planners had hoped for. But the war was not over. The humans kept moving. Colonel Henry Shaw led the ground assault on Keith Prime, the fortress world where the Dominari military had its main headquarters. His Marines landed in drop pods that screamed through the atmosphere like falling stars. They hit the ground running, their weapons already firing. Shaw was 45 years old, a career soldier who had fought on a dozen worlds. He had seen combat before. He had killed before. But he had never fought with this kind of cold determination. Every Marine in his unit felt the same way. They were not just soldiers doing a job. They were Avengers seeking justice. "Move forward," Shaw ordered. "Clear every building. Take prisoners if you can. Kill them if you cannot." The Dominari soldiers fought hard. They were well-trained and well-equipped. They knew their territory, and they used every advantage. But the humans kept coming. Every time the Dominari pushed them back, they pushed forward again. Every time the Dominari killed one human, two more appeared to take their place. Private Maria Santos was 19 years old. She had joined the Marines 6 months ago, right after the New Dawn massacre. Her best friend from school had been on that ship. They had grown up together, played together, dreamed together about the future. Now her friend was dead. Maria was fighting through the corridors of an alien military base with a rifle in her hands. She was scared. Her hands were shaking. But she did not stop. She could not stop. Not until it was finished. "Contact left," someone shouted. Santos spun and fired. A Dominari soldier fell. She did not feel anything. She just kept moving. The assault on the main command center was the hardest fight of the day. The Dominari had fortified it heavily, turning it into a fortress within a fortress. Colonel Shaw lost 50 Marines taking the outer defenses. He lost 30 more fighting through the corridors. But finally, they reached the command bunker. Inside, they found Keth Voreth. The Dominari warlord was surrounded by his personal guard, the best soldiers in the hegemony. They fought to the last warrior, dying one by one as the humans pushed deeper into the bunker. When the final guard fell, Voreth stood alone. He was smaller than Shaw had expected. On the recordings, he had seemed like a giant, a monster who filled every room with his presence. In person, he was just an old alien with cold eyes and shaking hands. "You cannot do this," Voreth snarled. "I am a commander of the hegemony. I am protected by diplomatic immunity. The Galactic Assembly will condemn you." Shaw walked up to him slowly. He remembered the recordings. He remembered the captain saying his final words. He remembered the children screaming. "The Galactic Assembly watched your people murder 50,000 innocents," Shaw said quietly. "They did nothing. They said nothing. So forgive me if I do not care about their condemnation." He grabbed Voreth by the arm and forced him to his knees. "You are under arrest for crimes against humanity. You will be taken to Earth. You will stand trial. And when you are found guilty, you will face justice." Voreth tried to speak, but Shaw was already turning away. He had no more words for this creature. He had said everything that needed to be said. The news of the victory spread across the galaxy like a shockwave. Species that had lived in fear of the Dominari for thousands of years watched in amazement. As the young humans tore apart the ancient empire, the Galactic Assembly called emergency session after emergency session, demanding that humanity stop their advance, accept a ceasefire, negotiate for peace. Ambassador Hayes responded to every demand the same way. "We will stop when we have achieved justice," she said. Not one moment before, the war continued. Human fleets struck at Dominari shipyards, destroying the facilities that built their warships. Human marines captured military bases and communication centers, cutting the hegemony's ability to coordinate their forces. Human intelligence agents identified every officer who had been involved in the New Dawn decision, tracking them down no matter where they tried to hide. Some Dominari tried to surrender. They were treated fairly, given food and medical care, and held as prisoners of war. The humans were not cruel. They did not torture. They did not murder prisoners or attack civilians. They simply kept fighting until their enemies could no longer fight back. Admiral Mitchell watched the reports come in from her flag bridge. The war was going better than anyone had predicted. The Dominari were falling back on every front. Their government was in chaos, with different factions blaming each other for the disaster. Admiral Palmer said, "We have received a message from the Dominar Council. They want to discuss surrender terms." Mitchell nodded slowly. She had been waiting for this moment. Part of her wanted to keep fighting, to make the Dominari suffer the way her people had suffered. But that was not why they were here. They were here for justice, not revenge. "Tell them we will meet," she said. "But make sure they understand. Our terms are not negotiable. Everyone responsible for the New Dawn will face trial. Everyone." Palmer nodded and left to send the message. Mitchell turned back to the viewport and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, floating in the darkness, was the wreckage of the New Dawn. 50,000 bodies that would never have proper burials. 50,000 stories that would never be finished. "Almost there," she whispered. "Almost." The war lasted 1 year, 3 months, and 17 days. Military experts across the galaxy had predicted it would take decades, maybe centuries, for humanity to defeat the ancient Dominari hegemony. They were wrong by a very large margin. The Dominar Empire crumbled faster than anyone could have imagined. Their fleets were destroyed or captured. Their military bases fell one by one. Their leaders turned against each other, each one trying to make a separate peace with the advancing humans. It did not save any of them. Captain Noah Grant commanded the task force that was sent to liberate the slave worlds. For 6,000 years, the Dominari had kept a dozen different species in chains. They used these slaves for labor, for entertainment, for whatever purpose suited them. The slaves had no rights, no freedom, no hope. They were born in cages and they died in cages. Grant was 38 years old, a quiet man with sad eyes who rarely smiled. He had seen the recordings from the New Dawn more times than he could count. He knew what the Dominari were capable of, but nothing had prepared him for what he found on the slave worlds. The first world they liberated was called servitude by its masters. The slaves who lived there called it hope, because hope was all they had. When Grant's ships appeared in orbit and his marines landed on the surface, the slaves did not know what was happening. They had never seen aliens who were not Dominari. They did not understand why these strange creatures were breaking their chains. Grant walked through the slave quarters personally. He saw families living in tiny cells, packed together like animals. He saw children who had never seen the sky because they had been born underground in mining facilities. He saw old people who had worked their entire lives without a single day of rest. An alien woman approached him. She was from a species Grant did not recognize, with blue feathers instead of hair and large golden eyes. She was thin and weak, her body showing the effects of years of hard labor and little food. "Why?" she asked. Her voice was soft and musical, even though it was rough from disuse. "Why did you come? You do not know us. We are nothing to you. Why did you come?" Grant looked at her for a long moment. He thought about the New Dawn. He thought about 50,000 people who had died because an alien warlord decided they were worthless. He thought about the birthday party that had turned into a massacre. Because no one should live in chains, he said simply. And because those who do evil things must face consequences. The woman stared at him. Tears began to fall from her golden eyes. She reached out and touched his hand, as if she could not believe he was real. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you," Grant nodded. He could not speak. His throat was too tight. The liberation continued. World after world, the human forces freed the slaves and arrested the Dominari who had kept them in bondage. The slaves were given food, medicine, and shelter. They were told they were free, that no one would ever own them again. Many of them did not believe it at first. They had been slaves for so long that freedom seemed impossible. But slowly, carefully, they began to understand. They began to hope again. Meanwhile, the main human fleet advanced toward Zyre Prime, the Dominari homeworld. This was the heart of the hegemony, the world where their species had first evolved, where their government sat, where their most powerful leaders lived. If Zyre Prime fell, the war would be over. Admiral Mitchell led the assault personally. Her fleet had grown during the war as other species sent ships to join the human cause. The Dominari had made many enemies over 6,000 years, and those enemies were happy to help bring them down. The defense of Zyre Prime was fierce. The Dominari knew that this was their last stand. Every ship they had left was gathered here. Every soldier who could hold a weapon was ready to fight. They would not surrender their homeworld without a battle. The battle lasted 3 days. It was the largest space engagement in galactic history. Thousands of ships on each side fought and died in the darkness above Zyre Prime. The sky was filled with explosions and weapons fire. Debris rained down on the planet below like a metal storm. Mitchell stood on her bridge through all of it. She did not sleep. She barely ate. She watched her people fight and die, and she made the hard decisions that commanders must make. Send this ship to block that attack. Sacrifice this squadron to save that fleet. Every choice cost lives. Every choice was necessary. On the second day, Commander Reed reported that her fighter squadrons had destroyed the last Dominari carrier. The enemy's ability to launch fighters was gone. The balance of the battle shifted. On the third day, the Dominari fleet broke. The surviving ships tried to run, scattering in every direction. Some were caught and destroyed. Others were captured. A few managed to escape into deep space, but they were no longer a threat. The path to Zyre Prime was open. All ships, Mitchell announced over the fleet communication channel, begin planetary operations. Military targets only. I repeat, military targets only. Civilian areas are off limits. We are not here to destroy the Dominar people. We are here to end the Dominari military. Distinction mattered. Where the Dominari had murdered every human on the New Dawn, without hesitation, the humans went out of their way to avoid civilian casualties. Schools, hospitals, and homes were left untouched. Only military bases, government buildings, and defense installations were targeted. The Dominari civilians watched from their windows as human ships filled their sky. Many expected death. They expected the humans to do to them what their own forces had done to the New Dawn. They waited for the bombs to fall. The bombs did not fall. Instead, human soldiers landed and began arresting military officers. Human engineers began shutting down weapon systems. Human medics began treating wounded Dominari soldiers. Enemies who had been trying to kill them hours before, a Dominari child, no more than 10 years old, ran up to a human marine named Kevin Brooks. Brooks was 23, a farm boy from Kansas who had never expected to travel to the stars. He looked down at the alien child with surprise. "Are you going to kill us?" The child asked. Brooks shook his head. "No, we are not here to hurt you. We are here to stop the people who hurt us." The child thought about this for a moment. "But we are your enemies. Your soldiers were our enemies," Brooks replied. "You are just a kid. Kids are not enemies. Kids are kids." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a candy bar. He'd been saving it for himself, but the child looked hungry. He handed it over. The child took it carefully, as if it might explode. "What is it?" the child asked. "Chocolate. It is sweet. Try it." The child took a small bite. His eyes went wide. He had never tasted anything like this before. For a moment, he forgot about the war, forgot about the fear, forgot about everything except the strange, wonderful taste in his mouth. Brooke smiled. It was the first time he had smiled since the war began. The Dominary government surrendered 2 days later. The old ruling council was arrested and replaced by a group of moderates who had opposed the New Dawn attack from the beginning. These new leaders understood that the old ways were finished. The hegemony would have to change or it would be destroyed completely. Admiral Mitchell met with the new Dominari leadership aboard her flagship. The surrender documents were simple and direct. Every military officer involved in the New Dawn decision would be handed over for trial. The hegemony would pay reparations to the families of the victims. The slave worlds would be freed and given independence. The Dominari military would be reduced to a small defensive force. One of the Dominari counselors complained that the terms were too harsh. "This is humiliation," he muttered. Mitchell looked at him with cold eyes. "Humiliation would have been what we could have done if we had followed your example. We could have killed every soldier who surrendered. We could have bombed your cities. We could have executed your leaders without trial." She leaned forward. "We did none of those things. We held ourselves to a higher standard, even in war, even against enemies who showed us no mercy. So no, this is not humiliation. This is justice. Accept it and be grateful." The counselor said nothing more. The documents were signed. The war was over. On Earth, the news was met with quiet relief. People gathered again in the public squares, but this time they were not mourning. They were celebrating in their own somber way. The fight was finished. The dead would have their justice. President Kane addressed the world that night. "We have won," he said simply. "But let us not forget the cost of this victory. 50,000 innocent people died to start this war. Thousands more died to end it. We honor them all. We remember them all. And we promise them all that their sacrifice was not in vain." The trials were held on Concordia Station, the same place where the Galactic Assembly had once dismissed humanity's pleas for justice. Now, the Great Hall had been transformed into a courtroom, and representatives from 300 species watched as the perpetrators of the New Dawn massacre faced judgment. Keth Voreth sat in the defendant's chair, his wrists bound by energy restraints. He was smaller than he appeared in the recordings, older and more tired. The war had taken everything from him. His fleet was destroyed. His soldiers were dead or imprisoned. His empire had fallen. All that remained was this final reckoning. Prosecutor Stephen Drake presented the case for humanity. He was 52 years old. A lawyer from Boston who had spent his career fighting for justice in courtrooms across Earth. He had lost his daughter on the New Dawn. She had been 25. A newly graduated doctor who wanted to bring medicine to the frontier colonies. Her body was never recovered. Drake did not speak of his personal loss. He did not need to. The evidence spoke loudly enough. "The defendant ordered the execution of 50,000 civilians," Drake said, his voice calm and measured. "Men, women, and children. Entire families." He recorded the massacre and broadcast it across the galaxy. He bragged about what he had done. He wanted everyone to see. He activated the display system. The recording played again, as it had played so many times before. The screams, the gunfire, the laughter of Dominari soldiers as they killed the helpless passengers of the New Dawn.
Ow.
"There is no defense for this," Drake continued. "There is no justification. This was murder on a scale that shocks the conscience. And the defendant did it not because he had to, not because he was threatened, but because he wanted to teach humanity a lesson about power." He turned to face Voreth directly. "Well, humanity learned a lesson. But it was not the lesson you intended to teach." Voreth was given the opportunity to speak in his own defense. He stood slowly, his old body struggling with the movement, and faced the tribunal. "I was protecting my people," he said. "The humans were expanding too quickly. They were taking territory that should have belonged to the hegemony. If we had done nothing, they would have eventually threatened our way of life."
Oh.
Drake interrupted. "So you murdered 50,000 people as a preventive measure?" They were an inferior species, Voreth snapped. They needed to learn their place. Every great civilization has done what we did. Every powerful empire has crushed potential rivals before they could become threats. I did nothing that has not been done 1,000 times throughout galactic history. The courtroom was silent. The representatives of 300 species looked at Voreth with expressions, ranging from disgust to horror to cold fury. Drake nodded slowly. You are right about one thing. This has happened before. Powerful civilizations have crushed weaker ones throughout history. But humanity is different. We remember. We hold grudges. And we do not accept that might makes right. He turned to the tribunal. The defendant admits his guilt. He admits his reasoning. He believes he had the right to murder innocent people because he was stronger than they were. This is not a philosophy that can be allowed to stand. If we do not punish this crime, if we do not make an example of this criminal, then we are telling the galaxy that genocide is acceptable. That murder is just another tool of diplomacy. He paused, letting his words sink in. The prosecution asks for the maximum penalty. Not out of revenge, not out of hatred, but because justice demands it, because 50,000 voices cry out for it, because the galaxy needs to know that there are consequences for evil. The tribunal deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous on all counts. Guilty of genocide, guilty of war crimes, guilty of crimes against sentient beings, Voreth received the death penalty. So did his 43 co-defendants who had participated in planning and executing the massacre. The sentences were carried out within the week, broadcast across the galaxy just as the original massacre had been. The lower-ranking officers received life sentences on a prison asteroid deep in human space. They would never see their homeworld again. They would never breathe free air again. They would live out their remaining years knowing what they had done and why they were being punished. Ambassador Hayes addressed the Galactic Assembly one final time after the trials. Concluded. Justice has been served, she said. The guilty have been punished. The war is over. Humanity does not seek further conflict. We want peace. We want friendship. We want to build a future where all species can prosper together. She paused and looked around the chamber. But let me be clear about one thing. We will never forget what was done to us. We will never allow it to happen again. Any species, any government, any individual who attacks human civilians will face the same response. We protect our own, always. The assembly listened in silence. The old order had been shattered. The Dominar hegemony, which had dominated this region of space for 6,000 years, was now a shadow of its former self. In its place, a new power had risen. A young species that had proven it would not be bullied or intimidated. On Earth. The New Dawn Memorial was completed on the first anniversary of the massacre. It stood in Geneva, a massive structure of white stone and crystal that caught the sunlight and scattered it in all directions. 50,000 names were carved into its walls, each one carefully researched and verified, each one representing a life that had been stolen too soon. President Kane spoke at the dedication ceremony. Millions of people watched around the world, and billions more watched across the galaxy. We build this memorial not to celebrate war, he said, but to remember peace. To remember the ordinary people who were going about their ordinary lives when violence found them. To remember the teachers and doctors, the children and grandparents, the dreamers and builders who died not because of anything they did, but simply because they were human. He gestured at the monument behind him. Every name on this wall is a story that will never be finished. A child who will never grow up. A couple who will never grow old together. A dream that will never come true. We owe it to them to remember. We owe it to them to honor their memory by building a better future. He looked out at the crowd, at the millions of faces watching him. But we also owe it to them, to be honest. This memorial exists because we failed to protect our people. We failed to see the danger coming. We failed to prevent a tragedy. We must never fail like that again. Captain Daniel Harris's family was given a special place at the ceremony. His wife, now a widow, stood with their daughter and grandchildren. They listened as a recording of his final message was played for all the world to hear. Tell Earth we love them. Tell them to remember us. Commander Scott Palmer, now promoted to captain, visited the memorial later that evening. The crowds had gone home. The cameras had been turned off. He stood alone before the wall of names. Reading them one by one, he found the name he was looking for near the center of the wall. His sister. She had been 30 years old, a botanist who was going to Ethon 4 to study alien plants. She had been so excited about the adventure, she had sent him a message just before the new dawn departed, telling him how happy she was, how she could not wait to see the new world. She never saw it. Palmer touched her name gently. His fingers traced the carved letters, feeling the shape of the word that meant everything to him. "I miss you," he whispered. "Every day. Every single day." Stood there for a long time, remembering. When he finally turned to leave, he noticed that he was not alone. Admiral Mitchell stood a few meters away, looking at a different section of the wall. They did not speak. They did not need to. They simply stood together in the darkness, two survivors honoring the dead. Above them, the stars burned cold and bright. Somewhere out there, the wreckage of the new dawn still drifted in the void, silent tomb that would float forever among the stars. But the people who had died there were not forgotten. They would never be forgotten, Earth, remembered Earth always would, and the galaxy had learned a lesson it would not soon forget. Humanity had arrived among the stars. They came in peace, but they did not come weak. They offered friendship to those who wanted friendship. They offered trade and cooperation to those who sought prosperity. But to those who sought to harm them, who sought to murder their people and laugh about it, they offered only one thing: justice. Swift, certain, and absolute. The stars were no longer safe for those who preyed on the innocent. Humanity was watching. Humanity was waiting. And humanity would never forget this was the new order of the galaxy. This was the legacy of 50,000 souls who died far from home. This was the promise that Captain Harris made with his final breath, that billions of humans had kept with their blood and sacrifice. Tell Earth we loved them. Tell them to remember us. They remembered. And they always would. The end.